Happy Bicycle Day, everybody. This is a really special one this year. Today is April 19th, 2023, and there is a new moon in Aries that is turning into a solar eclipse. And it's also the second new moon in Aries of this month, which is very rare to have two new moons in a month. And it's also coinciding with Mercury station retrograde conjunct Uranus in Taurus. So this bicycle day is one where I want to come in and honor my holy trinity of psychedelics, astrology, and psychotherapy. These have been the three main pathways or pillars of my approach to life and being human and understanding both cosmos and psyche. I'm extremely grateful to Albert Hoffman for his discovery and the way that it has fundamentally changed my life, my consciousness, my relationships, and my work. If it wasn't for his discovery, I would not be who I am or where I am today. And I know that that is true for so many of us. I think that there is a special connection or relationship with entheogens and astrology. They're both, sometimes people would say, technologies of the sacred that naturally expand and open our consciousness to beyond the egoic realm that connects us with the larger ecosystem of either nature on this planet Earth or to the larger ecosystem of our solar system and out into the wider cosmos. I want to focus in on particularly the planetary combination of Mercury and Uranus, since they are tightly conjunct today and will be in a long conjunction over the next month and a half or so because of Mercury stationing retrograde. It elongates this transit, which is usually only about a week long. And now we're going to get about, 6 times the length of that. Mercury-Uranus, I think out of all 45 planetary pairs, is most correlated to the practice and the learning and the language of astrology. And I think it also most relates to that dynamic of learning something new and really putting our minds to studying and taking in new knowledge. Mercury-Uranus is the archetype of being very open-minded to new information that is usually quite either counterculture, progressive, goes beyond the norm, but also that something about it is often quite radical. And we know that even though astrology is gaining more interest in the popular imagination, it still is something that is fringe, perhaps even taboo, and also definitely eccentric. And Mercury-Uranus is the combination that is most oriented towards thinking about and speaking about new paradigm ideas, anything that is avant-garde. And I think that it particularly lends itself to pattern recognition. And what is studying astrology other than pattern recognition as we track these cycles of time and develop our archetypal eye to be able to see these archetypes in everyday human life. And that's really, the majority of the practice of astrology after we learn the technical aspects of it, which I've said many times is only about 10% of the practice. The rest of the 90% is the ever deepening journey into the archetypal realm and being able to see and correlate and relate to the way that the planetary archetypes connect to what we're seeing in human life, multidimensionally, from the psychological realm to the spiritual realm to the interpersonal realm, the interpsychic realm, and that the refinement of our ability to see those archetypes and to be able to articulate them, I think, is so much of the astrological journey. But it goes even beyond that, right? It's not just about being able to see it and being able to speak to it. It goes even deeper into participation. And this is what we mean about embodiment and co-creation: is how do we actually live with these energies that go beyond the intellectual realm? A beautiful aspect is the intellectual realm, and Mercury-Uranus is very air element, right? And it can often stay in the place of the intellect. But what we know from a wisdom path is that it's the process of actually bringing that knowledge into the body in a lived way, which is what becomes wisdom. So Mercury-Uranus really lends itself to the study of language and the study of anything new. And we know that astrology, astrologos, is the language of the stars or the heavens, and that it's a language like any other language. If we were to learn English, French, Japanese, Spanish, like, we need to commit ourselves over a period of time to becoming fluent in this language. And how do we do that? We know the best way to do that is immersive. People who go to the country where the language is spoken by natives is going to much more quickly and efficiently learn the language, right? By living in it, by feeling it and tasting it and hearing it, and being challenged to grow beyond your current level or understanding of what is being spoken around you. There is nothing like feeling like an outsider, or feeling like an alien, to encourage one to learn a language. And so I think that there's always a place for learning a language through reading books. And what we know is that in order to be able to speak a language, we have to be able to enter into dialogue with other people. And this is very true about the language of astrology. Reading books, listening to lectures or podcasts can only take us so far. There's a limit to how much our language can develop, because language is a shared thing. It requires us to be in relationship and community to develop it. So what I've seen as both a student of astrology and a teacher of astrology is the importance of being in community to be able to speak and develop and share this language. And that it's really about coming into conversation with one another that allows us to be fluent in our own personal understanding of astrology, and then also to be able to learn and grow from sharing with one another how it is that we're seeing astrology, right? And that's how the discipline of astrology itself actually gets to develop and evolve, is through our conversations with one another. So Mercury-Uranus really teaches us and shows us that in order to come into the language of astrology, we have to be able to converse. Just as when we're learning any language, there is a component of it where we listen to it, there's a component to it where we speak it, and then there's a component where we read it, and then there's a component where we write it. And I think it's all four of those things that are required to become fluent in any language. And that is very much the case with astrology. This is why for the last 15 years, I journal on what is going on with my chart and my transits and the world transits, or any kind of astrological insight that I have. I have 15 years worth of journals where, virtually every entry is somehow correlating what's going on in that moment with something astrological. And it's an absolute treasure trove. This is also why, especially in the beginning of my studies, I was as part of as many astrology groups as I possibly could, to be able to develop and deepen into the language, right? Like, for example, I created a moon circle of 12 women where each sign of the zodiac was represented. And that when we would meet, whatever sign we were on, for example, moon in Aries, which is what I have, I would present on my understanding of what it's like to be moon in Aries, what it's like to live from my subjective experience with that placement of the moon. And then I would lead some kind of embodied exercise that felt like an invocation and a journey into moon and Aries so that everyone else could have a felt embodied experience of what that was. And each month we would take a turn where somebody would share in that way from their moon sign. Also started a support group called the Neptune Society, where if you had Sun Neptune, also with either Moon and Mercury in major hard aspect, then we would meet on a regular basis for years at a time to talk about what it's like to be a human in this world with that alignment, and to support each other in that. And we would go on retreats, and we would do really fun excursions together to hot springs or to the ocean, right? All things that were very Neptunian, where we would sit and converse for hours and hours and hours at a time about everything astrological. And it was like being with kin, and there was a pleasure and a safety in that camaraderie. And so these are just two examples of ways that we can create community and to therefore have dialogue around the language and the practice of astrology. I think that also it's really important to immerse ourselves around trusted astrologers. I think Mercury-Uranus in its shadow form is hyper information. Whatever Uranus touches, it can sometimes create a kind of hyper quality to it. That sometimes with Mercury-Uranus, there's a kind of overload of information. The brilliance of it is the thirst for knowledge and information, and going from a variety of sources, and getting a lot of different voices and perspectives involved, which is brilliant. And sometimes there's this kind of hyper intake of information and knowledge to the point where it's like you don't remember what you read, and you don't remember the conversation you had, and it kind of just stays in more of this like intellectual, maybe even ethereal space. And though that can be fun, and it can feel exciting, and there's a place for that, and it can even feel like candy, to the mind, there does become a point where it's like, sometimes less is more, and quality over quantity. And I think we really have to watch out for this in the discipline of astrology, because there's so much out there now about it in a way that there never used to be. It used to be only astrologers, right? Like professional astrologers would speak and write about this. And now that's not the case. It also is much more blurred on what a professional astrologer is. I think astrology is a discipline that particularly lends itself to folks claiming that they're a professional astrologer without there being obviously any accreditation to that, right? We don't have much accreditation really at all in this field. And, I often can see this also with musicians, where somebody, says, I'm a musician. And it's like, there's a difference between playing music for fun than being a professional musician, right? Where you make your living, you make your livelihood from playing music. Professional musicians devote hours and hours and hours every day to playing their instrument. And that offering of one's mind, body, spirit to the channeling of a music and being in that level of devotion is very different than someone who enjoys to play music in their free time or on occasion. I think the same is true for astrologers. Like, it's okay to say that we love astrology, that we study astrology, that we maybe even are an astrologer, But that is different than folks who have devoted their entire lives to being professional astrologers, whether that's a professional counseling astrologer or a teacher of astrology. And I think that that distinguish, um, there's not a lot of other professions where you can get away with saying, I'm a doctor without being a doctor, right? Or I am a firefighter. I am an astronaut. I am a lawyer. Like these things have protocol, higher education and accreditation that one needs to go through. Okay, I'm not saying that the field of astrology necessarily needs that, but I am saying that when it comes to immersing ourselves in a language, we typically want to, and when we're learning something new or we're deepening into it, want to pay attention to the quality in which we are, taking in information, especially when it's new, right? Because we don't yet have that discernment of, what is more true and what is less true, or more resonant or less resonant. I think that also in honor of Bicycle Day and coming back to that Holy Trinity, I think that any kind of going into an expanded state of consciousness really lends itself to receiving kind of downloads or messages from the archetypal realm, because the archetypal realm essentially is the bridge between the seen and the unseen world, or between the physical world and the spiritual world. And the archetypal realm of the planets, I see as being part of the causal realm, is the closest thing that we have to non-duality here as human beings on Earth in this physical form. And I think that when we go into expanded states of consciousness, in whatever way you do that, that is where we're able to access the knowing or the wisdom of that. And what we know about things like the archetypal realm is that, or the imaginal realm, is that in order to understand it, in order to know it, we have to become it. So there becomes a certain level of being or consciousness where we have to become the thing in which we are wanting to know, and that the only way to know it is to become it. And that is something that I think is less talked about, especially when we're coming into how do we live astrology? How do we create ritual magic and healing with this practice? I think it's similar to doing something like depth therapy. A lot of times people will mistakenly call it talk therapy. And though, yes, we are using words and we're sitting here talking, in my experience as a depth psychotherapist, it's not talking. It's so much more dimensional than that. And it can be when the two beings are more come together with that kind of capability and intention, which is it's happening on so many other levels than just the talking or the intellectual level. And I think that really good therapy, when we're talking about this kind of therapy, and yes, there's a place for all forms of therapy. I'm not privileging this form, but I am saying that this certain type of therapy is a type of therapy that really is about embodiment. And that's why it's a process where we have to slow down and it takes time, because that's what embodiment is in order to transform at that level, we have to become the thing that we are imagining or envisioning for ourselves. The same is true for astrology. If we really want to know the planets, then there becomes a point where there's a limit to what we can learn through just reading about them, or having somebody else tell us what they mean. And this is why I think astrology and the path of astrology is so special, is because the way that it's a spiritual path of embodiment into divine wisdom is it becomes really about you forging your own personal relationship with the divine, with the planets, with the zodiac, through your embodied participation with them. And that's where things like sky watching and sky magic are ways to be able to develop your own personal relationship with the divine that no longer is mediated by any outside source. Now, with that being said, we need each other in order to refine and develop and understand what it is we're seeing. It can't be an insular process. That's not how it works. It needs to be a deeply relational process. However, that does not mean that then that would just be enough of in itself. Like, in order to be able to live with astrology, it really is about how we form our own personal relationship with these archetypes and how we have language and understanding for them. So I think that things like entheogens or expanded states of consciousness and things like depth psychotherapy are incredible spaces or states of consciousness that really lend themselves to being able to deepen into our relationship and our language with astrology. So those are just some of my thoughts that are coming through with this current Mercury-Uranus conjunction, and just some kind of channel of what Mercury-Uranus is about, which again is a phenomenal time to learn something new, including astrology or any language that you want to learn. And let's broaden our definition of language to include anything where we are in a deep conversation. So that could be learning an instrument, that could be singing, that could be coding, right? That is a language, that is a relationship. It's really about what gets co-created in shared spaces where we have a shared understanding of what's going on. And there's a million different ways to speak, right? And to speak and channel with the divine. But the Mercury-Uranus alignment is one that is particularly well suited for that happening in a way that is not only quick and accelerated, but also exhilarating and very exciting. I think that in Mercury-Uranus has a lot to do with the archetype of the beginner's mind, and there is a profound awe and wonderment there, that when we carry that beginner's mind, we're given special access to seeing things in a new and different way when we come in from thinking we already know everything. And so Mercury-Uranus is, can we put down what we think we know in order to see what is there? All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching this. I would love for you to subscribe to my channel, leave a comment. I always love to hear from you. Like this video and share it. Thank you so much. I'll see you next time.